Hi there, and thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar. Welcome to those who are tuning in for the first time, and welcome back to many of you who might be regular followers. My name is Sarah Snabel. I'm one of the co-founders of PROergonomics, and I'll be presenting today on a pretty hot topic these days, sitting versus standing at work. Before we get started, let me tell you a little about PROergonomics. So some of you who are listening today may already be clients of ours, but some of you are new and we haven't yet met. You might not be really familiar with PROergonomics. The PROergonomics team includes myself, Alexander Stinson, and Jennifer McGillis. All of us hold the CPE or CCPE designations, which is the Certified Professional Ergonomist designation, and we're also all registered kinesiologists in Ontario. We've been working as consultants for several years now, and we have a wide range of experience in a whole variety of industries. We really try to promote a team approach for our clients, so as much as you may only see one of us at your facility doing the assessment or the training, whatever it might be, we're always supporting each other behind the scenes as a team to make sure that our clients are getting the highest level of customer service and really getting a high quality end product or deliverable. Some of our consulting services are listed here. You can always check our website, www.proergonomics.ca, to learn more about some of these services. And as well, if you're looking for more detail or if you have questions, please feel free to get in touch with us and we can help. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have about these services. Looking at the agenda for the webinar today, we're going to start with addressing some of the media hype. So when we're looking at this debate, sitting versus standing at work, it's a pretty hot topic. There seems to be several articles in the media about how bad sitting is for us. I know that we get inquiries on a regular basis about standing workstations and many other unique types of workstations that are, they deviate from the traditional seated workstation. So I'm going to cover a little off on that, and then we'll cover some of the pros and cons of sitting and standing. Is sitting really so bad for us? And is standing that much better? And then I'll cover a few of the different options for standing or sit to stand desks, and ending with a summary of some take action tips for you to use in your workplace. These are just some of the words or phrases that you may have heard. How many of you have read an article about the health hazards of sitting? Sitting is the new smoking, sitting is toxic. Everything we seem to read seems to say that sitting is bad for us and sitting is essentially going to kill us. And we want to kind of look at those in a little bit more depth to see if that's true. But one thing I think that it definitely makes you think about is how much time the average person, yourself included, actually spends sitting in a day. If you think about a typical day for most of us, it might start with commuting to work. So you're sitting in a vehicle or on transit. You sit at your computer. You go to a meeting where you also sit. You get up and go for lunch, but you're also sitting at the lunch table, followed by a little bit more computer work, and then your commute home. Then when you get home, you just want to kick back and relax after your long day. And what do? You sit down and relax on the couch to watch TV in the evenings. So I think that's probably a pretty typical day for many of us, and it's a given really that many of us will have to sit for a large chunk of our day. There's some research out there that suggests that Canadian adults actually spend close to 75% of their waking hours each day sitting or reclining, and if you think about a typical day for yourself, I bet you that's not too far off. There's some other research out there that goes even further to say that we've become so sedentary in our days that it's been recommended that everybody needs to get 30 minutes of exercise a day. Well, again, this research is suggesting that we've become so sedentary that 30 minutes of activity or that time at the gym might not actually be enough to counteract those negative effects of sitting or being sedentary. I think that's some of that research it can be a little misleading or possibly misinterpreted. I mean, I don't want you to get discouraged and say, oh, well, if, my 30 minutes of exercise isn't even doing me any good, why do I keep bothering to make time for it? I think that's where it's getting misinterpreted. It's not to say that we shouldn't exercise, but what it does mean is that doing your 30 minutes of exercise a day is not enough of a reason. It doesn't give you that reason to make it okay to be sedentary for the rest of the day. So So it is important to try to find ways to be active, and I think that's probably where these standing workstations and some of the other unique workstation requests are coming from, is because people are trying to get more active and they're kind of, I don't know if they're going to the extreme, but they're definitely taking it a step further than to wanting to increase their activity by, almost wanting to work out while they're at work. Some of the new trends that we see where people are wanting to increase their activity at work include the standing or sit to stand workstations, treadmill workstations, where you can see that you're walking at a slow pace on a treadmill while working at your computer. The desk cycle, not pictured here, but that's something where you have a small pedal unit so you can actually cycle as if you're on a stationary bike while working on your computer. And then for years we've been getting requests about whether or not we support or what are our thoughts and opinions on the exercise or stability ball as an office chair. In general, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail in reviewing these alternative desk styles, but know that as a team, PROergonomics, we do support standing or sit-stand workstations when it's the right fit. We always like to do an assessment for that workstation rather than just giving a general statement saying yes or no. I do think that it can be warranted, but I'm always wanting to look at the individual, the tasks that they do, the workstation, the work environment. You just want to make sure that it's a really good fit. The other three options that are listed there, the treadmill, the desk cycle, and the exercise stability ball, as a team, we don't support these styles of workstations. I think overall they don't meet ergonomic principles and possibly they create some additional safety hazards. So again, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on those. We're going to focus on the standing workstations today. So when we look at some of the effects of sitting, some of those health effects, the first thing really is our posture of our spine. So when we're standing, our spine is in the natural or the neutral S curve, and when we sit, that S curve essentially flattens out, so we're not getting that same neutral posture, and as a result it's placing increased pressure on the discs in our back and possibly some strain on our muscles. It is a relatively sedentary position. We don't burn as many calories sitting compared to standing, for example. And we're meant to be upright. Our heart, our cardiovascular system, our metabolic system, they all work best when we're upright. Even better bowel function, for example, is linked with the upright position. So patients who are hospitalized for bed rest, they frequently have a lot of problems with regularity, and so physical activity is often what doctors are encouraging to help get them more regular. It definitely leads to improved cardiovascular outcomes. So sitting doesn't necessarily help with those functions. As well, when we're sitting, we have not as much muscle activation, so we're not activating our muscles, we're not using as many muscles, again, as compared to standing. We need our muscles to move. Every time our muscles move or engage, they're acting as a blood pump, so they help to circulate blood back to the heart and then out through the body again from the heart. And so when we're sitting, when you're not activating those muscles, you're getting decreased blood flow. When we compare that to the effects of standing, so the first thing is really, when you're standing, you do have that neutral or that natural S curve in your spine, so there's potentially less pressure on the discs, and as well you've got more muscle activation. So think you've got more muscles that are working to keep you in the standing position, so therefore they're acting more as the blood pump. You're getting increased blood flow, and you are burning more calories when you are standing. Again, you're engaging more muscles, so it's about 3 times more calories that you burn standing as compared to sitting. So all of those seem like great reasons why we might want to stand instead of sitting. But think about your day. If you were to stand all day, even though you sit all day, you still want to come back when you get home at the end of the day, you want to kick back and relax and you sit. There's something about sitting that is relaxing, that when you're tired you just want to sit back and take a load off your feet. So standing all day can cause increased fatigue, and it might place strain and pressure on some areas that may not be affected when sitting. Low back would be for both sitting and standing, but maybe your hips, your legs, your feet, those are things that wouldn't necessarily get tired when you're sitting, but you might see strain, pressure, fatigue in the hips, legs, and feet when standing. Something else to consider, just kind of as a side note really, is to think about your office dress codes. Most are business casual or business professional. So if you just take a look at your footwear, what you're wearing right now, is that the kind of footwear that you would wear if you knew you had to do physical activity, if you knew that you were going to exercise? Because that's essentially what standing all day is. I know I've had this conversation several times with employees when we're trying to decide if a standing or a sit-stand station would be a good fit for them. And I've definitely had more than one person tell me that they wouldn't change their footwear. And so ultimately, I think this makes the decision easy. Standing is probably not the best option for them. You know, if you are not going to give up those heels or you're not going to give up those dress shoes when you're standing at work, then, you know, that's going to lead to, I think, further discomfort. And maybe standing feels good as a change because maybe you were uncomfortable sitting. So in the short term, maybe it feels better. But I do think that if you're not changing your footwear, if you're not careful, if you haven't done a good match in doing that assessment, that standing could cause further or potentially worse problems down the road. So we're going to look at three main categories of sit-stand options. The first one will be height adjustable desks, where the whole desk goes up and down. The second option is desk mounted equipment, so a unit that your keyboard and monitor go on so that they can just go up and down. And the third option is a keyboard and monitor arms, so just two independent pieces of equipment that raise your monitor and keyboard up and down. I'll start with saying that PROergonomics doesn't sell products, nor do we promote the pictures that are shown here more so than other products. They just happen to be a couple where I was able to find some easy pictures, and I am familiar with some of these. Talking about height adjustable desks, some of the pros would definitely be that the whole workstation adjusts. So you can have your paperwork, your phone, everything's going to come up and down with you as you move, so everything will be close to you when you're sitting as well as when you're standing. The adjustability range is usually quite good on these, so somebody who is 5 feet tall versus somebody who is 6 feet tall, they could probably use the same piece of equipment and be able to adjust it to their desired height. And they're relatively easy to use for the most part. It's usually a button that you push and it goes up and down. You can even get them to be programmable so that you can program the height that you like when you're sitting versus standing. So you push the button and it automatically goes to the pre-programmed height. Sometimes they might be a counter lever where you squeeze a lever and the desk raises up and down, and that often depends on the size of the desk. One of the more obvious drawbacks, I think, is the cost. It would be rare that you would find a height adjustable desk for less than $1,000, and it may not be a very large desk at that. Possibly that's not even including the resources or the money it costs to do the installation. And compatibility. So it needs to be compatible in several different ways. So one is that you need it to be compatible with the space, the actual physical footprint that you have available, as well as your location. So for example, just putting a height adjustable desk in an open office is one thing. Putting a height adjustable desk in a cubicle setting might have some additional challenges just because now you're dealing with the cubicle walls and the desk might need to be a support. When we talk about desk-mounted options, these are typically units that rest on the desk, so they're heavy enough that they can just sit on top of the desk, or they might require a clamp or a mount onto the desk, and it's usually the keyboard and monitor that would go up and down, so they kind of go up and down together as a unit. To know if this is going to be the right type of product for you, you want to make sure that you're thinking about the task that the employee is performing. So if they need to use their phone a lot and they need to refer to notes when they're on the computer, when they're in that standing option, you might want to look for a unit that has enough space for that. Some units are only big enough that they really just hold the monitor and then the keyboard and mouse. There's not really a lot of space for paperwork. So you want to look for options that do have a platform or that have extra little arms that can hold the phone or a document holder, for example. The cost does vary on these units. In general, they are less than a height adjustable desk. And I can't speak to the specific cost of the products that are pictured or other products on the market, but in general, they are less than a height adjustable desk. They're pretty easy to use. Usually it's a counter lever, so it's a squeeze button with really minimal effort, and the keyboard and monitor will go up and down together as a unit. The quality, it will vary in terms of features that are offered between different products. They're not necessarily all created equal. Of the ones that are pictured on just this page, the human scale and the VariDesk as an example, the keyboard tray doesn't go lower than the desk. So if you've got somebody who is relatively short, so for example somebody who's about 5 feet tall, this keyboard tray may not go low enough for them when they're in the seated posture. And so it may just mean that you need to look for a different model within that brand, or you're going to look for a different product. The Ergotron models, those two in particular, do have the keyboard tray go lower than the desk height, and there are several other models on the market too that have that feature. Another nice thing is that they're portable, so with a desk mounted option you can mount it on one desk, and because it may not necessarily be drilled into the desk, it's relatively easy to pick up and move to another desk. The last in this of these three categories is using a keyboard and monitor arm. So you might be able to use some existing equipment. Maybe you already have your monitor on an arm and you just need to get the keyboard tray arm, and maybe you already have a keyboard tray but it doesn't raise above the desk. So it could be something where you're just replacing that arm mechanism for one that does go above the desk. Typically the height range is somewhat limited. I think the keyboard tray arms, you might be able to get about 10 or 12 inches above the desk height, and so for somebody who's 6 feet tall, for example, that's probably going to be too low for them. So you do have some limitations there. You also want to make sure that you're factoring in the tasks that they're doing. If they have to do any paperwork or they're on their phone a whole lot, there's no option to, with using this equipment, there's no option to bring your phone or your notes up higher to you. They would remain on your desk. The cost on this is going to vary. If you already have the equipment, obviously it's relatively low in cost, and if you have to buy everything from scratch, if you have to buy the monitor arm and the keyboard arm, it's probably going to be a little bit less, or maybe the equivalent of one of the lower price point options in the desk mounted category. Ease of use is it might take a bit more time. Now you have two pieces of equipment to adjust, so the ease of use might be a subjective description. So we know that people, if they feel like it takes more time or if it's a hassle, that they're not likely to adjust it. So if you've got to adjust two pieces of equipment here, if the cost difference is only $50 compared to the desk mounted option, that might help to make your decision. Now that we've talked about the three main categories of equipment, I think something that's important to summarize here is that, as much as we've highlighted some of the pros and cons of the sit-to-stand options, I don't think that it's necessarily required that you have a sit-to-stand workstation to have proper ergonomic setup or to be comfortable at work. So, having a sit-to-stand workstation is not necessarily going to solve all of your issues, or discomfort issues, I should say. I think that an assessment is always warranted to make sure that it truly is needed. There definitely are medical conditions that will warrant it, but just in order to try to increase activity, to try to combat some of the health hazards that sitting may have, for kind of following all the hype in the media, I do think that there are some other options. I don't think that we absolutely have to go to this standing workstation in order to have the positive health benefits. So some tips that I then have, ways that you can try to increase your activity, use some of the equipment that you already have. So for example, many people have an office chair that has several adjustment features on it. You may or may not know what all or some of them do, but this would be a good opportunity to take the time to fiddle around with them and find out what they do. So it could be the seat height adjustment, the back height adjustment, the back angle. The seat can tilt so that you're able to rock when you're in your seat. You can adjust the seat depth, the depth of that seat pan. So making some small adjustments to your chair throughout the day and each day would be good opportunities to increase movement. You could engage that rocking feature on your chair when you're on a long phone call, or if you're taking a conference call, or when somebody comes to your desk to talk to you. You can put the rocking feature on, and then you can lock it so that you're sitting stationary when you're doing your typing or reading reports. You want to try to limit static postures, or again, trying to find ways to move as much as possible. So, if you're stuck in a meeting, for example, maybe you want to try to stand up during that meeting. Again, you could look for the rocking feature on the chair in the meeting. Maybe when you present, maybe you make it a rule in your meeting that whoever is speaking has to stand up to speak. That would be a good way of trying to limit static postures or try to increase movement and muscle activity. Look for any opportunity to use another posture. So again, this might be something as simple as walking to go visit your coworker instead of calling them or emailing them. Taking that opportunity, looking forward to walking to the printer or the photocopier as opposed to thinking that it's a pain that you have to walk to the printer or photocopier, right? So it can actually be a benefit that the printer is not right beside you. Something you could also try to do is rotating tasks. So if filing, for example, is an activity that you do in a day, and maybe you do maybe half an hour of filing in a day, look for ways, like, is it possible that you could break it up and do it in 10 or 15-minute chunks as opposed to stockpiling all the filing for one chunk of time in your day? Maybe you take the stairs when you have to go to your meeting. Okay, maybe you don't walk up all 7 flights of stairs, but maybe you choose to walk up 1 flight of stairs and then take the elevator for 6 flights. That could be an example. I read an article recently on LinkedIn from Richard Branson, who is a big fan of walking meetings. He feels that they enhance creativity, and he feels that if he's got to sit in a boardroom for hours on end, how can that possibly be conducive to creativity? So he's a big supporter of walking meetings. And as I was doing Google search trying to find some tips on walking meetings and what they're all about, I came across the Cleveland Clinic, which is where I got this logo from, so I've kind of borrowed from them. I think they're a wellness clinic, but they've got a whole page on promoting walking meetings and tips on how you can make them successful. So just something that I thought was interesting. Something that's really important, just kind of as a whole, is that you want to have a consistent plan to address those incoming requests. So once you implement a standing workstation or a sit to stand workstation, you're setting a precedent. So it's important to have a plan to make sure that you're getting out a consistent message to your employees. And we've seen our clients do this in several different ways. So possibly if the employee requests it or they present a doctor's note, their policy, the company's policy, might say that you need to have an assessment done. You have to have an assessment done of your workstation. Sometimes they'll have somebody internal doing that assessment. They've got somebody designated to do it. Or sometimes it means that they have an external consultant that comes in and does that assessment. Some clients we've seen where they just provide the sit-stand equipment to anyone who asks. And sometimes we've also seen it where maybe they just provide it for a department. So for example, in a call center setting, or I've seen it in like a plans review department where they are looking at a lot of large paperwork, so like large files and drawings. So they made it a standard that whole department gets sit-stand workstations. So it doesn't matter how you do it. Think about what would work best for your work site, and come up with a plan. Put something in writing. Having a policy is probably your best bet to make sure that you've got something consistent to rely on. Something to keep in mind is that we also don't always provide a sit-stand workstation just because somebody presents a doctor's note. Again, you want to make sure that in particular, we want to make sure that we are being thorough in doing our assessment. We want to look at the workstation, the tasks, the individual's needs. We've seen a doctor's note recently where it said the employee needed to have a standing workstation. In fact, I think they probably meant a sit-to-stand workstation, because I think if we had recommended that a standing workstation be put in place, I think down the road that would have led to further problems as opposed to relieving her discomfort. I think that standing all day probably wasn't the best option. So again, it's important to do that assessment. Sometimes a medical condition will definitely warrant that a standing workstation or having the standing option is something that would help, but you don't have to stand to be able to solve your discomfort concerns. Thanks so much for joining in our webinar today. I hope that you learned some tips to apply to your workplace to address the requests that you might be getting. Please don't hesitate to give me or my colleagues a call or an email if you have any further questions. We're always happy to chat with you about what's going on in your workplace. And we hope that you can join us for another webinar in the future. Next month, our webinar will talk about how to address the generations in your workplace. So, we often hear about how to address the aging workforce and using ergonomics to address our aging workforce. But what about the new workforce, those younger, the millennial generation workers? My colleague Alexandra Stinson will be presenting, so I hope that you can join us, and please visit our website, www.proergonomics.ca, for more information.